I go by the name Gray, and I am currently a self-taught artist, hoping to make it as a professional one day. I'll be talking about doing simple color studies, which I've just completed last week, and I just want to share with you all what I learned. But the ultimate question is, as you can see by the title, are simple color studies worth it? Is it worth it for us as learning artists to study? And in short, absolutely yes. I know that it may seem pretty boring, especially because you're not really tackling more interesting objects such as characters or your OCs or a really cool landscape. But I want to show and just encourage you guys. I want to provide my viewpoint about this kind of study, because I know we likely know in our minds that doing simple studies is beneficial to us in general, but maybe we have not seen the testimony of fellow learning artists also say so. We might only hear professionals say so, and I'm here to kind of affirm it for you guys as someone who's also learning that it is totally worth it to study these kinds of simple objects. And I also want to share with you guys that it can also be fun, and it can also help you find your own personal style. So more on that later. Color and light is generally known as how I learned from other artists or heard from other artists online. It is probably one of the most mysterious fundamental to learn. But I'm finding it super interesting and the most fun fundamental to learn so far. Just a side note, an important side note is I will likely keep mentioning and referencing other videos from actual professional artists that have experience in the art industry, because I'm still a learning artist and I want you guys to know where I've obtained information, and so you know whether what I'm talking about is a trustworthy source. So just to give you guys a quick list of resources that I used, I've used the Artist's Master Series, Color and Light, the one that featured Nathan Fowkes, Charlie Pickard, and Guez, and more artists. I've also referred heavily in the study one of Marco Bucci's YouTube videos, and if you do not know Marco Bucci, he has been a professional working artist that worked with Disney, for example, and he has very, very high quality educational videos about art. I highly recommend his channel. The third resource I used was Lighting Mentor's egg video and simple color study video. So Lighting Mentor is basically a very experienced professional artist that worked with very big studios such as Naughty Dog. Yeah, these are the three main sources I've used. Throughout my self-learning art journey, it's pretty fun to just draw and have like these professional artists from YouTube just channel in information. I highly recommend listening to professional artists give their input about different areas of art on YouTube while you draw. I think it's like motivating and it's something to listen to as you draw. So recommend that to you guys, but I feel like you guys do that already if you found this video. So far, I only had a very general understanding of color and how light interacts with objects. And most of the information I had about these fundamentals came from random YouTube videos or the color and light book that I've mentioned earlier. But when I came across one of Marco Bucci's videos, he described how light interacts with value and with objects to the point I understood how these principles interacted with each other to a more clearer degree. And I'm not joking, his way of explaining things just makes things sound so clear and understandable. So yeah, I like this guy. There have been multiple kinds of projects that I've been wanting to complete, but every time I want to do them, I feel very unprepared and overwhelmed, because when you dive into an illustration, for example, you kind of have to juggle all of these fundamental principles: color, anatomy, composition, value, and lighting. And I think I didn't have enough of the capacity in my brain to be fully confident in applying all of these principles at the same time. And I guess I didn't know how to really do the prep work that was required before working on a big project. Like, I didn't know how to prep my values for a big project, or I didn't know how to really prep my colors in a way that made me confident about my big project. So doing these simple studies, like these color studies, helped me understand how I might figure out the prep work for a bigger project that I want to do. So I decided I'm going to be really going at these daily fundamental studies. So focusing on what Marco Bucci talked about in this particular video, which he talked about, there are basically 5 main values that should be accounted for when you do drawing or painting, and that is figuring out the average shadow, bounce light, ambient occlusion, the average light, and the halftone. And putting these 5 different value types, he put it in 2 different categories. 3 values belonged to the shadow values. The other 2 values belong to the light values. And especially when I was watching and listening to his video, it was like an epiphany right there, because I was like very unclear about where the halftone is supposed to belong to. And in his video, I realized that, the halftone, which is the value that you most commonly find between the border of shadow and light, that tone belongs to the light, if you know what I mean. So I think his video really cleared things up for me. Anyways, I've probably repeated about this video too many times, but what I've discovered, let me see. Yeah, so I've hungered down and started really grinding on this sheet, as you can see on screen. I've divided this big page into small boxes, and then in each box, save for maybe 2 big boxes, for each small box, I would do like maybe 2 or 3, I think, studies per day. And each study, at least the small studies, would take from a range of maybe 15 minutes to maybe an hour or 45 minutes. As for the 2 large studies, I just kind of went overboard and probably did 2 hours each on them, around that time range. Yeah, and I hope that you can see that I've progressed as I did more and more of these color and value studies, from the very first one that I did on the far top left to the very last ones, which are the 2 big studies that is on this page. And the reason why I've consolidated all these studies into just one page is because these studies are so simple. It feels better to see like a bunch of them in one page, because like if you're working digitally, you would like work on one study and then you don't see it again because you've opened another page. But this way I can see my progress and just feel a bit more satisfaction. So if you ever do these kinds of paintings, I highly recommend that you put them all in one page just to give yourself a little encouragement about your progress and see it. And as mentioned earlier, even though these studies are very simple in their shape and form, I knew that, at first I already knew that it was going to help me somehow, but I didn't know that it would help me to the extent that I figured out more and more what brushes to use, for example, and what kind of preference I specifically had for each stroke, and what kind of opacity I liked, or what my art style would be like. So let me just list some of the pros of simple studies, and please let me know that I know that when I'm talking, I think I tend to be, I might be a little more general in what I'm saying. I kind of give you guys a summary of what I learned and some art tips that I learned, but let me know if you would prefer me to kind of just talk about each little study I did, for example, and kind of my thought process to each of it. Yeah. So some pros of these kinds of studies are you don't need to juggle everything at once like you do for a character concept sheet or illustration. There's no need to worry about composition because it's from a photo, and you don't need to worry about shape language because the shape is literally so simple, and more. You have a chance to experiment, as I've said before, with brushes and you have a chance to experiment with brushes and how you use those various brushes. So, as I've mentioned in the past, for me, I really don't prefer the kind of thick painterly feeling on a piece for my personal artwork. I want my piece to feel more light, more airy, more crisp in their shape language, and I find that some brushes, like maybe those oil brushes that is provided by Clip Studio Paint, for example, or maybe gouache, like how they mix with other brush strokes and how their texture is on the paper gives a more full and thick feeling. I've realized more and more that it's just not my thing. I've discovered a set of brushes from an artist that I particularly thought lended itself to helping me find my art style better. So I've used that brush set again for these sets of color studies. I've also started experimenting with other brushes that I thought might contribute to my art style, but I wasn't so sure about. Doing these little color studies or value studies enabled me to experiment and test these other brushes that I feel more tentative to use, and I didn't have to worry about how these brushes impacted my studies, because these are just studies and these are not the big projects. So by doing this, I don't have to rack my brain over whether or not to use this brush. From these small paintings, I can already develop that confidence and understanding. So yeah, and for example, in one of these studies, I've tried to use a watercolor brush or some watercolor brushes, I believe, that was provided by Clip Studio Paint, because in general, I thought that these kinds of watercolor brushes would help me in delivering what I want, the feeling I wanted. But I realized in that small study that it still produced that kind of thick, stuffy feeling that I didn't want to go for. So after that, one of those studies, I've decided that, okay, in the future, I will use this kind of brush sparingly and not let it dominate in a piece, because I know how it will turn out. Other than that, an obvious pro of doing these simple painted observations is that you complete pieces faster, and it certainly feels good to have something completed in a day as opposed to a project that you've worked on for weeks and then the end was not satisfactory. So you'll have faster satisfaction, and since you've done so many pieces in a shorter amount of time, for example, I did these studies all in, I believe, 2 weeks. So if I only did one big project for 2 weeks, then I wouldn't feel as productive and confident, because at this stage, a big project for me it's like 90% bound to fail, because I'm juggling so many fundamentals and I have like a high expectation for myself. But yeah, that's where simple studies really come to benefit you and satisfy you. So it's certainly more stress-free for sure. Lastly, one big pro that I've really come to be happy about in these simple paintings is that you can recognize your coloring style and your color preferences faster. So what I mean by that is whenever you see artists online, on Instagram for example, they have these distinct colors potentially that they use, and these distinct color palettes that they usually tend to go for. Like some artists, as I mentioned in the previous video, tend to paint for value. Their value range is larger, but their colors aren't as vibrant because they focus on conveying how, for example, light and shadow, I guess they value more, but I guess they really also want to emphasize how dark shadows interact with bright light, for instance. And some other artists paint for colors. For example, artists that stick to a pastel color palette. Both of them give off very different feelings. And for me, the feeling that I want to convey, I've discovered in doing these studies, is that I tend to paint for value. It best conveys what I was going for. And in one of the studies, in fact, one of the 2 big studies I did in this page really affirmed that for me, because at first I wasn't really sure. I also wasn't really sure like what kind of color palette really suited me. Do I paint for color? Do I do very vibrant colors? Or do I focus on light and shadow instead? So I've tested these 2 different styles and ways in one of these colors value studies, and I'm more and more confident that in future projects I will probably defer to painting for value. To me, I think painting for value, and I hope you guys are understanding what I mean. Like, just like an example, the popular artist Guiz, that's kind of what I mean by painting for value. I think painting for value allows a more subtle and ethereal kind of feeling to my piece. It's not very loud, but it can be dramatic by playing with how light is compared with the shadow in the piece. So maybe expect more of that style from me in the future. Okay, so last but not least, almost lastly, I think I should answer the question, why these particular shapes? Why do you not do more interesting, simple studies like foliage, trees, maybe waterfalls? From what I learned from listening to the other YouTube channel, Lighting Mentor, it's important to keep these kinds of studies texture-free or almost texture-free, because it allows you to really digest some important fundamentals of value and color without distracting yourself trying to render each texture that you find on a more complex object. So doing studies from spheres, from pyramids, pyramid-like shapes, from cylinders, focuses yourself into really digesting this area. Yeah, all of the resources I've used will all be put in my description below, so if you want to check them out, they will be there. Coming out of this set of studies, I am more confident about how to apply values in terms of their relation to light into a more complex piece or project. Now, I still don't think that I'm fully ready to tackle on a big project, but I do have a weekly project that I hope to finish by this week. There is one other thing I want to study before I delve into that project though, and that is value. And I know you might be thinking like, what? You already tackled value in these studies, and I agree, but I've discovered there is even more to learn about value, especially in terms of its relation to composition. So I'm currently studying that right now, and I found a super high quality resource for studying that too, and I can't wait to share it with you guys. Looking forward to finishing these particular set of studies I'm working on now, and so stay tuned, and wishing you guys all the best in your own art journeys or whatever journey you're making, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Bye bye.